Good morning. It is Thursday, June 18th. Today's 7 stories all sound different on the surface, but they are really asking the same thing. When does an idea become real enough to constrain the next move? A ceasefire framework turns into signed paper. A summit turns into a trade corridor. A rate pause turns into a harder path. A digital ambition turns into a scorecard. A vaccine pitch turns into an evidence gate. A Mars plan turns into a mission contract. And a climate warning turns into an ocean system that is already running hot first. The Iran story has moved again. On June 17th, reporting from AP and Axios said the United States and Iran signed an initial memorandum of understanding. The outline is meant to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, create a sanctions relief path, and start a 60-day negotiation window on the nuclear file. That matters because the story is no longer about whether diplomats can draft a framework. It is about whether the first implementation steps can hold long enough to create trust, and the sequence is unforgiving. If shipping does not normalize, the commercial pressure returns. If inspection language is vague, the nuclear dispute returns. If either side reads the first dates differently, the whole paper structure starts looking like a pause instead of a settlement path. So this is the dangerous middle stage. Signed paper is more real than an announcement, but still much weaker than a durable agreement. That is why the map matters here. Hormuz is not just a diplomatic phrase. It is the choke point that tells markets whether the memorandum is functioning in the real world. Second, Russia is hosting a commemorative summit with ASEAN in Kazan. And the point is more practical than ideological. Kremlin and AP both frame the meeting around trade, investment, and industrial links on the 35th anniversary of relations. In plain language, Moscow wants to show that sanctions pressure has not cut it off from Asian commercial routes. That does not mean Southeast Asian states are signing up for a Russian worldview. Most of them are doing what they usually do, keeping room to trade without giving up strategic flexibility, so the visual logic is not a podium shot. It is a corridor. Rail, ports, industrial parts, agricultural goods, payments, and logistics all matter more than speeches, and that is why this summit is useful to watch. It shows how middle powers respond when a large state under pressure tries to convert politics into routing options. If the deal stays shallow, the meeting is mostly symbolism. If the logistics deepen, then the corridor itself becomes the story. Third, the Federal Reserve left rates unchanged on June 17th, keeping the target range at 3.5 to 3.75%. That sounds calm. But the calmer the headline, the more you have to read the path underneath it. Updated projections push the conversation away from cuts and toward the possibility that rates may need to stay higher for longer, or even move higher if inflation refuses to cool. So the real policy move was not the hold. It was the repricing of the future path markets care, because money is priced on expectation, not only on the current setting. A central bank can tighten conditions simply by making tomorrow feel less generous than yesterday. This is why the dot plot matters more than the pause line. One says, what happened at this meeting? The other says how much patience the central bank thinks it still has. And once that patience looks shorter, borrowing, investment, and hiring decisions all start adjusting before the next meeting even arrives. Fourth, the European Commission's new State of the Digital Decade package is a reminder that strategy documents eventually become scorecards. The Commission says Europe remains off track on several 2030 goals, including business uptake of AI and cloud, basic digital skills, and parts of the semiconductor and connectivity push. This matters because Europe has spent years talking about digital sovereignty. But sovereignty is not a mood. It is a stack. Skills, infrastructure, business adoption, capital, and time. If one layer lags, the slogan starts outrunning the system underneath it. The interesting part of this report is not just that some targets are behind. It is where the slippage sits. Skills gaps slow adoption. Slower adoption weakens business demand. Weaker demand makes it harder to justify large infrastructure bets. Then the whole sovereignty narrative starts leaning too heavily on policy instead of deployment. So the report is less a scolding than a diagnostic map. It shows where Europe still has to convert political intent into operating capacity. Fifth, Moderna's seasonal mRNA flu shot reached a new checkpoint on June 18th when the FDA's Vaccines Advisory Committee reviewed the application for adults 50 and older. This is an important moment because the headline is easy to oversimplify. The question is not only whether mRNA can work for flu, it is what kind of evidence regulators want for different age bands, especially adults 50 to 64 versus the oldest and most vulnerable groups. According to Moderna's briefing materials, the company is arguing that the product showed meaningful protection and an acceptable safety profile. Regulators are testing whether that claim is strong enough, consistent enough, and relevant enough for the populations that matter most. That is why this story is really about thresholds. A platform can be promising, a trial can be encouraging, but approval lives at the boundary where statistical evidence becomes public health permission. If the vaccine clears that gate, it expands the commercial and medical case for mRNA beyond COVID. If the gate narrows, it tells the industry that flu is a much tougher proving ground than platform optimism implied. Sixth, NASA announced a public-private partnership with Relativity Space to advance Mars science. Under the arrangement, NASA provides the Aeolus atmospheric science payload, while Relativity supplies the spacecraft, launch vehicle, and cruise operations. The point is not just that a private company gets a Mars headline. The point is that NASA is testing a different delivery model for planetary science. Mars missions are usually associated with long timelines, highly customized hardware, and mission structures that feel almost artisanal. A commercial-style package pushes the opposite idea. Standardize more, integrate faster, and let the launch provider own more of the transport stack that can be powerful if it works. Scientists get instruments to Mars on a faster rhythm. NASA spreads mission risk differently, and launch companies get a chance to prove they are not only transport businesses, but science delivery partners. So this is not primarily a rocket story. It is a workflow story about how planetary science gets moved from lab bench to another world. Seventh, the World Meteorological Organization's State of the Climate in Asia 2025 report says ocean heat in the region reached a new record, and marine heat waves affected nearly the entire ocean area of Asia. That matters because ocean heat is not background scenery. It changes monsoons, fisheries, storms, coastal livelihoods, and health risks all at once. When the ocean stores extra heat, the effects do not stay offshore. They move into food systems, flood risk, coral stress, glacier-linked water systems, and the lived experience of heat on land. This is what makes the report more serious than an annual weather summary. It is describing a continent-scale system that is retaining more energy and distributing that stress through multiple channels at once. That is also why location matters. Asia holds dense coastlines, major port systems, glacier-fed rivers, and enormous urban populations. A hotter ocean, there is not only an environmental signal, it is an economic and social exposure map. Those are the 7 stories for this morning. Iran shows what happens when a framework finally touches the shipping lane. Russia and ASEAN show how trade corridors can matter more than ceremony. The Fed shows how a pause can still tighten. Europe shows what digital ambition looks like when measured. Moderna shows how platform optimism meets the evidence gate. NASA shows Mars science moving toward a more commercial timetable. And WMO shows that ocean heat is becoming the climate signal that pulls many other risks with it. That is the morning briefing for Thursday, June 18th. The pattern to remember is simple. Implementation is where abstract language starts getting expensive. Paper turns into shipping risk. Forecasts turn into financing conditions. Targets turn into capability gaps. Trial results turn into approval thresholds. Mission ideas turn into payload responsibility. And warming turns into system stress. When the implementation layer changes, the story changes with it.